Heart of Darkness, page 16. He turned to his work. The noise outside had ceased, and presently in going out I stopped at the door. In the steady buzz of flies, the homeward bound agent, was lying flushed and insensible. The other, bent over his books, was making correct entries of perfectly correct transactions, and 50 feet below the doorstep I could see the still treetops of the Grove of Death. Next day I left that station at last with a caravan of 60 men for a 200-mile tramp. So number 29, how does Marlowe get to the central station? He walks 200 miles with a group of 60 men. No use telling you much about that. Paths everywhere, a stamped-in network of paths spreading over the empty land, through the long grass, through burnt grass, through thickets, down and up chilly ravines, up and down stony hills ablaze with heat, and a solitude, nobody, not a hut. The population had cleared out a long time ago. Well, if a lot of mysterious black people armed with all kinds of fearful weapons suddenly took to traveling on the road between Deal and Gravesend, catching the yokels right and left to carry heavy loads for them, I fancy every farm and cottage thereabout would get empty very soon. He's making the point that if there are a bunch of foreigners coming into these people's neighborhood and enslaving them, so wouldn't everybody go ahead and leave? If the same thing happened in England, that would definitely be what occurred. Okay, only here the dwellings were gone too. Still, I passed through several abandoned villages. There's something pathetically childish in the ruins of grass walls. Day after day, with the stamp and shuffle of 60 pair of bare feet behind me, each pair under a 60-pound load. Camp, cook, sleep, strike camp, march. Now and then a carrier dead in harness, at rest in the long grass near the path, with an empty water gourd and his long staff lying by his side. A great silence around and above. Perhaps on some quiet night the tremor of far-off drums, sinking, swelling, a tremor vast, faint, a sound weird, appealing, suggestive, and wild, and perhaps with as profound a meaning as the sound of bells in a Christian country. Once a white man in an unbuttoned uniform, camping on the path with an armed escort of lank Zanzibaris, very hospitable and festive, not to say drunk, was looking after the upkeep of the road, he declared. Can't say I saw any road or any upkeep, unless the body of a middle-aged Negro with a bullet hole in the forehead, upon which I absolutely stumbled 3 miles further on, may be considered as a permanent improvement. I had a white companion, too, not a bad chap, but rather too fleshy and with the exasperating habit of fainting on the hot hillsides, miles away from the least bit of shade and water. This guy is pretty funny. I like his description of this guy and what ends up happening to him. Annoying, to hold your own coat like a parasol over a man's head while he's coming to. I couldn't help asking him once what he meant by coming there at all. To make money, of course. What do you think? He said scornfully. Then he got fever and had to be carried in a hammock slung under a pole. As he weighed 16 stone, I had no end of rows with the carriers. I think 16 stone is like over 300 pounds. And you understand that the carriers are the African people that they are, and they're having to carry him in one of those like hammock things. They jibbed, ran away, sneaked off with their loads in the night. Quite a mutiny. So one evening I made a speech in English with gestures, not one of which was lost to the 60 pairs of eyes before me. And the next morning I started the hammock off in front all right. An hour afterwards I came upon the whole concern wrecked in a bush. Man, hammock, groans, blankets, horrors. The heavy pole had skinned his poor nose. He was very anxious for me to kill somebody, but there wasn't the shadow of a carrier near. I remembered the old doctor. It would be interesting for science to watch the mental changes of individuals on the spot. I felt I was becoming scientifically interesting. However, all that is to no purpose. On the 15th day, I came in sight of the big river again and hobbled into the central station. It was on a backwater, surrounded by scrub and forest, with a pretty border of smelly mud on one side and the 3 others enclosed by a crazy fence of rushes. A neglected gap was all the gate it had, and the first glance at the place was enough to let you see the flabby devil was running that show. The flabby devil, like we talked about the lusty red-eyed devils, this is the other. This is the creepy European devil coming in. White men with long staffs in their hand appeared languidly from among the buildings, strolling up to take a look at me, and then retired out of sight somewhere. One of them, a stout, excitable chap with black mustaches, informed me with great volubility and many digressions as soon as I told him who I was, that my steamer was at the bottom of the river. I was thunderstruck. What? How? Why? Oh, it was all right. The manager himself was there. Oh, quite correct. Everybody had behaved splendidly. Splendidly. You must, he said in agitation, go and see the general manager at once. He is waiting. Okay, so number 30, what is the problem with Marlowe's white companion on the trip? He's always fainting. And it causes a problem because the African people don't want to carry him anymore, so they throw him off into the bush. And when Marlowe finally arrives at the central station, they say, oh yeah, your steamboat, it's at the bottom of the river, number 31. Where does he find his steamer? At the bottom of the river. Bad news. Okay, I did not see the real significance of that wreck at once. I fancy I see it now, but I'm not sure. Not at all. Certainly the affair was too stupid when I think of it to be altogether natural. Still, but at the moment it presented itself simply as a confounded nuisance. The steamer was sunk. They had started 2 days before in a sudden hurry up the river with the manager on board, in charge of some volunteer skipper, and before they'd been out 3 hours, they tore the bottom out of her on stones, and she sank near the south bank. I asked myself what I was to do there, now my boat was lost. As a matter of fact, I had plenty to do in fishing my command out of the river. I had to set about it the very next day. That, and the repairs when I brought the pieces to the station, took some months. My first interview with the manager was curious. He did not ask me to sit down after my 20-mile walk that morning. He was commonplace in complexion, in features, in manner, in voice. He was of middle size and of ordinary build. His eyes, of the usual blue, were perhaps remarkably cold, and he could make his glance fall on one as trenchant and heavy as an axe. But even at these times, the rest of his person seemed to disclaim the intention. Otherwise, there was only an indefinable, faint expression of his lips, something stealthy, a smile, not a smile. I remember it, but I can't explain. It was unconscious, this smile was, though just after he had said something, it got intensified for an instant. It came at the end of his speeches like a seal applied on the words to make the meaning of the commonest phrase appear absolutely inscrutable. He was a common trader, from his youth employed in these parts, nothing more. He was obeyed, yet he inspired neither love nor fear, nor even respect. He inspired uneasiness. That was it, uneasiness. Not a definite mistrust, just uneasiness, nothing more. You have no idea how effective such a faculty can be. He had no genius for organizing, for initiative, or for order, even. That was evident in such things as the deplorable state of the station. He had no learning and no intelligence. His position had come to him. Why? Perhaps because he was never ill. He had served 3 terms of 3 years out there. Because triumphant health and the general rout of constitutions is kind of a power in itself. When he went home on leave, he rioted on a large scale, pompously. Jack ashore with a difference in externals only. This one could gather from his casual talk. He originated nothing. He could keep the routine going, that's all. But he was great. He was great by this little thing that was impossible to tell what could control such a man. He never gave that secret away. Perhaps there was nothing within him. Such a suspicion made one pause, for out there were no external checks. Once, when various tropical diseases had laid low almost every agent in the station, he was heard to say, "Men who come out here should have no entrails." He sealed the utterance with that smile of his, as though it had been a door opening into a darkness he had in his keeping. You fancied you had seen things, but the seal was on. When annoyed at meal times by the constant quarrels of the white men about precedence, he had ordered an immense round table to be made, for which a special house had to be built. This was the station's mess room. Where he sat was the first place, the rest were nowhere. One felt this to be his unalterable conviction. He was neither civil nor uncivil. He was quiet. He allowed his boy, an overfed young Negro from the coast, to treat the white men under his very eyes with provoking insolence. Okay, so he meets the central station, and number 32, what explains the success of the manager at the central station? He's never ever sick, so he's been able to be promoted up through the ranks because he's just happened to be there. He always shows up. And he's not a very good manager because number 33, what is the condition of the central station? Marlowe calls it deplorable. It's in terrible condition. But he goes on to say, number 35, men who come out here should have no entrails. I'm sorry, number 34. What is the meaning of men who come out here should have no entrails? He's saying if you have intestines, you're likely to get an intestinal parasite and get sick. So If you had no entrails, you would not be able to get sick. So number 34, they would not be able to get sick. Okay. He began to speak as soon as he saw me. I'd been very long on the road. He could not wait. Had to start without me. The upriver stations had to be relieved. There had already been so many delays that he did not know who was dead and who was alive and how they got on, and so on and so on. He paid no attention to my explanations, and playing with a stick of sealing wax, repeated several times that the situation was very grave, very grave. There were rumors that a very important station was in jeopardy, and its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. Hoped it was not true. Mr. Kurtz was... I felt weary and irritable. Hang Kurtz, I thought. I interrupted him by saying I had heard of Mr. Kurtz on the coast. Ah, so they talk of him down there, he murmured to himself. Then he began again, assuring me Mr. Kurtz was the best agent he had, an exceptional man of the greatest importance to the company. Therefore I could understand his anxiety. He was, he said, very, very uneasy. Certainly he fidgeted on his chair a good deal, exclaimed, "Ah, Mr. Kurtz," broke the stick of sealing wax, and seemed dumbfounded by accident. Next thing he wanted to know how long it would take to... I interrupted him again. Being hungry, and kept on my feet too, I was getting savage. How can I tell? I said. I haven't even seen the wreck yet. Some months, no doubt. All this talk seemed to me so futile. Some months, he said. Well, let's say 3 months before we can make a start. Yes, that ought to do the affair. Excuse me. I flung out of his hut. He lived all alone in a clay hut with a sort of veranda, muttering to myself my opinion of him. He was a chattering idiot. Afterwards, I took it back when it was borne in upon me, startling me with what extreme nicety he had estimated the time requisite for the affair. Okay, so number 35, what is the rumor about the upper station? It's in jeopardy and that Kurtz is ill. And you notice that even Marlowe says that all of the talk of the white people is futile. I went to work the next day, turning, so to speak, my back on that station. In that way only, it seemed to me, I could keep my hold on the redeeming facts of life. Still, one must look about sometimes, and then I saw this station, the men strolling aimlessly about in the sunshine of the yard. I asked myself sometimes what it all meant. They wandered here and there with their absurd long staffs in their hands, like a lot of faithless pilgrims bewitched inside a rotten fence. The word ivory rang in the air, was whispered, was sighed. You would think they were praying to it. A taint of imbecile rapacity blew through it all like a whiff from some corpse. By Jove, I've never seen anything so unreal in my life. And outside, the silent wilderness surrounding this cleared speck on the earth struck me as something great and invincible, like evil or truth, waiting patiently for the passing away of this fantastic invasion. Oh, these months. Well, never mind. Various things happened. One evening, a grass shed full of calico, cotton prints, beads, and I don't know what else, burst into a blaze so suddenly you would have thought the earth had opened to let an avenging fire consume all that trash. I was smoking my pipe quietly by my dismantled steamer and saw them all cutting capers in the light with their arms lifted high, when the stout man with mustaches came tearing down the river, a tin pail in his hand, assured me that everybody was behaving splendidly, dipped about a quart of water and tore back again. I noticed there was a hole in the bottom of his pail. Number 36, what happens to the storage shed? It gets set ablaze.